Come on in, pull up a chair, and take a load off, because today I'm going to review and page through Pathfinder Punks in a Powder Keg from Paizo Inc. Will your player characters want to dance with these punks in the first chapter of the Outlaws of Alkenstar adventure path? Or would you be better served just tossing a match into this powder keg and watching it go up? Well, you're going to find out right after this. Howdy, 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 gang. Welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. As I mentioned in the open, today I'll be reviewing and paging through Pathfinder Punks in a Powder Keg from Paizo Inc. This first chapter in the Outlaws of Alkenstar adventure path is written by Vanessa Hoskins with additional writing provided by Stephanie Lundeen. This 96-page softcover carries an MSRP of $24.99, or you can grab just the PDF alone for $17.99. So let's swing on over to the other camera, because here I've got Punks in a Powder Keg. So a few things to mention before we dive on in. First off, the fine folks over at Paizo Inc. were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any sort of compensation in addition in order for me to provide my thoughts about this adventure with you. And of course, these days, it's important that you know that. I'm also going to stay picture-in-picture up here. So as I page through, I'm going to cut off a little bit of the upper left of the book. Speaking of paging through, we're not going to look at each and every page of the adventure, but I do want to give you a very good feel for what's in this first chapter of the adventure path and share my thoughts about it with you. So let's take a look at the back real quick. Light a fuse. Ragtag outlaws get their hands dirty in the oil-slicked alleyways and whiskey-soaked saloons of Alkenstar, the city of smog. To enact revenge on the mogul who ruined them, these renegades must steal from the rich, take down crooked shield marshals, and aid a mysterious gunslinging patron. In a city where the clockwork guards are literally as tough as brass, anti-heroes will need true grit to dole out overdue justice. The Outlaws of Alkenstar adventure path begins with Punks in a Powder Keg, a complete adventure for first to third level characters. All right, jump on in here. So we are going to see that the front cover provides us with a map of the Gold Tank Reserve, which is a location that the player characters are going to have to hold up. And we get a breakdown of Hellside, just a side view. And then we get a bit of a map of Alkenstar on the back. So jumping on in, first of all, let's give some of the artists some credit here. Show that off right there. We've got our cover artist, our interior artist as well. And then we are going to take a peek at Punks in a Powder Keg. All right, so essentially, I'm going to point out, if you do not have the Guns and Gears supplement, or you have no interest in the Guns and Gears supplement for Pathfinder, or if you don't want black powder firearms in your games, or you don't like steampunk or clockwork, this is going to be an easy pass for you, because it is jam-packed with guns and gear, and it has a real kind of steampunkish feel. This is a location in Galarian that magic is very unreliable. Some areas it just seems to not work at all. And your player characters probably are not going to be rolling up or creating true magic-using characters like they would in most of these adventure paths. So just to point that out. Also should mention that you really ought to get the, just the free download. You can get the player's guide to Outlaws of Alkenstar because it's going to give you some background about this campaign as well. So essentially what's going on, the player characters they're outlaws. They're being referred to as anti-heroes here, but the reality is they don't strike me as anti-heroes like I'm used to, like from fantasy literature. They're just effectively characters that have been taken advantage of and who've been framed, who've been set up. Problem is, none of that actually takes place in the adventure. That is all backstory that you're going to create with your player characters. And to be honest with you, I think that is a huge miss. Because you've got this big bad, this mogul that the player characters want to take down. They want to take revenge on this guy. Why? Oh, well, it's part of the backstory. I am the kind of game master where when I'm running something, I want my villains to be villainous. I want the player characters to really have a reason to be going after these baddies. And here it's just like, oh, well, if you want to play Pathfinder tonight, you want revenge on this guy, okay? All right, let's go. It's like, okay. Personally, I would have that be the first chapter of the adventure. I would have the player characters, maybe they were sent out on a mission, on a job, and they get double-crossed, and all goes south, and the blame is all thrown onto them. Perfect. Right there, your player characters are like, yeah, let's get that guy. Here it's just like, whatever. This is your backstory. All right, so it's broken up into 3 chapters like we see for just about every adventure path chapter that we see. So we got 3 parts here. So first off, the player characters are recruited by this kind of shadowy saloon owner who says, hey, you want revenge on this guy? I know of a secret bank that supplies him and his crooked law enforcement in the town, and they provide you the means and methods to be able to go and rob this secret bank. And it's just combat, just one combat encounter after another. One of the big problems that I find in this adventure path is, well, for one, there's lots. There are a lot of problems with this adventure path, I hate to say. The reality is, this is probably my least favorite Pathfinder adventure I have ever read, honestly. I think it's got problems throughout. It's the epitome of a lot of things I really, really dislike about a lot of directions that role-playing games have taken in the past few years. And I will discuss that when I do my summary and my final thoughts. But it's just a lot of, combat, a lot of, rolling dice. Rolling dice to see if you succeed at something. What I was going to say is one of the big issues I've got with this adventure is the player characters have practically zero input on what's going on. There is so little player agency in this adventure. I know I talk about railroads, and railroads can be fine. And I talk about Call of Cthulhu adventures. Many of those are railroads. This adventure seems like the player characters never have any control over what they're supposed to be doing. Every time they turn around, it's like, okay, it reminds me of playing one big series of fetch quests from a really crappy PC role-playing game. It's just the vibe that I get, where it's like, okay, so player characters go and they rob this bank, and then they return to the shady character. And of course, there are spoilers here. It's an adventure review, right? So if you're hoping to play this, you're probably going to want to tune out now. Anyway, so the proprietor of this saloon is actually an agent for the nobility of the town. So they're actually not kind of like a shady fence sort of character. They're actually, a lawful good character. And essentially, the player characters are just sent off to do things. So now, there is a portion of this that I thought was pretty fun, which I thought I personally could have a really entertaining time running, is the second half of this robbery. The player characters are trying to escape, and they have to flee through this scrapyard. And there's a lot of things going on in the scrapyard. There are some different factions involved, and I love faction play. And I could have a bunch of fun with this. And the goblins who lord over the scrapyard, it's like they are lords of the trash heap. But there are also some other factions that are trying to squeeze them out. I have to point out, the NPCs throughout are pretty weak. Most of these NPCs they're just like a single note. They're not original, in my opinion. There's a crooked deputy who I think is very poorly drawn out for the game master as well as the players as well. So, kind of the big premise of this adventure is that this alchemist has created this explosive compound called pyronite, and everybody wants to get their hands on it. It is much more powerful than any explosive anyone has ever seen. So everybody wants to get their hands on it by hook or by crook. So the player characters in the second chapter have to go and escort this alchemist back to the saloon, which is kind of their base of operations now. And it's all these traps that are set up around the alchemist's home. The alchemist himself, right there, Gattleby, comes across as kind of a Doc Brown sort of character who is very unlikable. A very unlikable Doc Brown. And essentially, the player characters are there to escort him to the saloon, and he's forgotten about it. And there's all these deadly traps that the player characters have to go through. And even after he finds out that they're there to help him, he's sort of like, yeah, whatever. It's like, okay, all righty. I mean, I can understand wanting to create an NPC who's unlikable, that, it's kind of like, well, this is a pain in the ass that we have to escort this guy and protect him. But once again, he's just a one note. And that's kind of the thing with the NPCs presented in this adventure. They're just all kind of like a one note NPC. There's very little effort that's been put into creating believable characters. So player characters have to go and escort the alchemist to the saloon. And of course, everybody wants to get their hands on this alchemist. So there are two other groups that attack the player characters to try to get the alchemist. And one of them is the Powder Keg punks. And they're like arsonists, pyromaniacs. And actually, one of the only NPCs I thought was relatively entertaining is Dewey Daystar, who's a bad guy, but he's a lechy bounty hunter. So the player characters are able to escort the alchemist to the saloon, and now the one group that attacked, that was a given. Everybody expected them to try to get their hands on the alchemist. Now the question is, why are these Powder Keg punks involved? So the third chapter is supposed to be an investigation. but there's very little investigating actually going on. It is going to a series of locations. There's 3 locations. Each location holds a clue of where they can find the person who hired the Powder Keg punks. And that is essentially it. And at each of these locations, it's just essentially just rolling dice. There's no actual piecing clues together or anything like that. Another aspect of this adventure, too, is there's always a safety net for the player characters. It's always assumed that they're going to succeed at whatever. There's never any discussion of, well, what if things go wrong? And a lot of this is, okay, well, if the player characters, you weren't able to succeed at these roles, well, then here, I'm going to just hand you this anyway. I hate that. I hate that in adventures. I'll give you an example. There is a location that wants to charge the player characters. It's a club. They want to charge the player characters a gold piece each to enter the club because they're not members of the club. It's like, like a dance club, whatever. And the player characters have an option of trying to sneak in. And of course, it's like, oh, well, it's got a difficulty of 20. But there's never any discussion about what the fallout is if they fail sneaking in. Also, seriously, 4 gold pieces? Your player characters can't come up with just 4 gold pieces to pay to get into this place? It's like, come on. All right. So eventually they're going to find out who it was who hired the Powder Keg punks. And of course, it's actually the location's all right. It's a bit of a dungeon crawl. And this is probably the section that I like the most of the adventure. I still don't think it's very good, but I like it better than a lot of the rest of the adventure. So they're going to find this person who believes that the alchemist has stolen their work and is actually laying claim to their work. So it also turns out that supposedly somebody else has reverse engineered this pyronite. And now the player characters in the next chapter are going to have to find who this person is. I don't know why. It's sort of like, oh my gosh, somebody else is going to be able to make this pyronite. And the player characters are actually going to have to leave Alkenstar to go off, I believe, into the desert to try to find this person who was supposedly reverse engineered the pyronite. Which, funny enough, you would think if all these people have had access to the pyronite, that it wouldn't just be one NPC who's reverse engineered it, but I don't know. All right, so then we're going to get a breakdown of the Barrel and Bullet Saloon. This is the saloon that the agent of Alkenstar, I should say, is the proprietor of. So we get a breakdown of the saloon. I got to be honest, I'm not sure why, because there isn't a lot going on at this saloon. I mean, yes, it's kind of the base of operations for the characters at, eventually, but it's not like there's any big like running battles or any big encounters that take place there. We get into the adventure toolbox, and we actually get some pretty cool stuff here. We get some more new gear, new black powder weapons, and we have a new archetype. We have some new black powder feats, some discussion of some of the various different clockwork creatures or entities that the player character is going to run across. Some of these are kind of interesting. Some of these are pretty nice. I could see utilizing them in other adventures as well. And of course, we get a bit of a bestiary and then a breakdown of our big bads, our 2 big bads in the adventure. And then it tells us next month, and we get some ads as well. That is Punks in a Powder Keg. Swing on over to the other camera so I can provide some final thoughts and give this a review score. I think this is just a really weak adventure. It really, really is. And as I had mentioned before, there's no player agency. It's always the player characters being told what to do. And I'll give you an example. There's sections, and we've talked about this previously as I've reviewed role-playing games. You don't want a ton of read aloud. Players tune out on read aloud. It's a known fact that if you unleash more than a couple of paragraphs, the players just start tuning out on you. There are long, multi-paragraph read alouds, especially with some of the characters the players will encounter. And then not only do we get that, then it's like, well, your players might ask these questions. So rather than giving us like bullet point answers, which would be easy for a game master to be able to utilize at the table, it's verbatim responses. So it's basically more read aloud. I don't like the fact that it's just, oh, hey, you're creating player characters who are outlaws. They've been wronged. They want to bring this guy down, but you're not role playing it. It's just, okay, that's built into your backstory. I think that's a huge miss because most players would be like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, just another villain. Who cares? Yeah, I want to play Pathfinder tonight. And I think that is a big missed opportunity. I do like the scrapyard section. I think that's kind of cool. And I do like the kind of dungeon crawl towards the end in the third chapter. But all in all, this is my least favorite adventure path that I've checked out. It checks a lot of boxes of things that I just am not a fan of. Lack of player agency, droning on, just read aloud. The dialogue that comes out of the NPCs' mouths is like from the absolute worst RPG lit books you've ever seen. The NPCs are just like one note characters. They're not fleshed out. They're not rounded at all. It's just, yeah, okay, here's the point about them that makes them a villain. Just really, really not a fan. I mean, this isn't terrible. This isn't like, oh my gosh, I could never possibly imagine running this. There are some good ideas in here that I would cannibalize, and I would have to break this way down and reconstruct it if it was going to make it to my gaming table. But then again, remember, this is an opinion, and I have been running role-playing games for over 4 decades, and I have a certain thing that I like. So what you like might be completely different. So, of course, your mileage with this review is probably going to vary. Anyway, on a scale of 0 to 10, I only give Punks in a Powder Keg for Pathfinder a 5 out of 10. Not awful, not terrible, not all that good either. Just meh. All right. That is it for this time out. If you like this review, if you like this video, just give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, ding that bell. It'll not only let you know when I upload videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more that you won't find here on the YouTube channel. Of course, thank you very much for taking time out to watch this video. And until I see you next time, here's hoping you enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang. Oh, hey, you're still here. Well, if that's the case, by all means, subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel by clicking right here. Check out the latest episode of the Gaming Gang Dispatch, or find out what YouTube recommends you check out from the channel. And of course, once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thanks for watching.